Welcome to the Global Research News Hour, produced in cooperation with CKUW-FM Radio in Winnipeg and the Centre for Research on Globalization at globalresearch.ca. And here's your host, Michael Welch.
Is there a new mode of hegemonic warfare taking the form of pro-democracy movements? How have institutions like the National Endowment for Democracy and affiliated non-governmental organizations advanced American imperial interests from communist Poland and Yugoslavia to Ukraine and Armenia? Are there aspects to the Nicaraguan protests not being discussed in mainstream media? What geostrategic goals might the U.S. be hoping to achieve through a weaponized student movement in Nicaragua? On this week's Global Research News Hour, we explore a rarely discussed weapon of modern warfare referred to as the Colored Revolution, or fake democracy movements. In our first half hour, geopolitical analyst and writer F. William Engdahl breaks down some of the history and evolution of this stratagem as captured in his recent book, Manifest Destiny. In our second half hour, we hear from Managua-based Stephen Sefton of the Tortilla Consal Collective about recent events in Nicaragua, which are beginning to resemble events leading to the soft coup in Ukraine. On this week's program, one of the most important weapons of warfare developed by a NATO country, colored revolutions in the Nicaraguan case study. Bringing you the analysis beyond the media headlines, the Global Research News Hour is on the air. Welcome to the Global Research News Hour for the week of May 25th, 2018. I am series host and producer Michael Welch. The Global Research News Hour is a special radio collaboration between the Center for Research on Globalization and campus community radio station CKUW 95.9 FM in Winnipeg on occupied Anishinaabe-Akin, the homeland of the Métis and the traditional territory of the Nahiawak and the Nakota. We seek to provide you with access to analysis of the major issues shaping our world today from thinkers, researchers, and unique political personalities rarely addressed by major media. Our program is available from the Center's website, globalresearch.ca. We'll begin our show with News Notes, a sampling of articles from the Global Research News site. The contract for the government of change, stipulated by Luigi Di Maio and Matteo Salvini on behalf of the Five Star Movement and the League, on the one hand, confirms Italy's membership of the Atlantic Alliance with the United States of America as a privileged ally, and on the other, promises an open-minded attitude to Russia, which should be perceived not as a threat, but as an economic and commercial partner, which would imply the withdrawal of sanctions to be rehabilitated as a strategic interlocutor for the resolution of regional crises, and even as a potential partner for NATO. The formula is not new. In June 2016, Prime Minister Renzi assured President Putin that the Cold War is now history, and that Europe and Russia can be excellent neighbors. A month later, at the Warsaw Summit, Renzi signed the EU-NATO Strategic Pact against Russia. How can the new government cease perceiving Russia as a threat and act accordingly while it remains a member of NATO, which, under the command of the privileged ally, is increasingly committed to combating the Russian threat? That comes from the article, Video for Italy, a New Government, the Same Privileged Ally of U.S. NATO, by Manlio Dinucci, posted May 24th, originally appearing on Il Manifesto. The elections are over, but the electoral process in Venezuela has not ended. Maduro has requested a full recount and verification of ballots to convince public opinion that the election was legitimate and transparent. It is tempting to compare Venezuela with other countries on the best practice of elections, but that is not the point or requirement for transparency. Venezuela would not be more democratic if it could show that some percentage is higher or lower than in some other country. Venezuela is democratic because the majority of the people made it so by exercising their constitutional right to vote freely and independently, and, we may add, despite the international interference. That comes from the article, Elections in Venezuela, democratic, fair, and transparent, by Nino Pagliccia, posted May 24th. Yulia and perhaps Sergei ahead are only allowed to publicly say what UK authorities permit, Britain scripting her remarks, letting her say only what her captors permit. According to former UK ambassador, human rights activist Craig Murray, Yulia's comment about, quote, not wishing to avail myself of Russian embassy services, unquote, mistranslated what she said. Clearly she recited UK scripted remarks, Reuters complicit in the deception. Yulia is a Russian national, visiting Britain only to see her father. Except for a brief April 5th scripted-sounding phone conversation with her cousin Victoria back home on a temporary phone given her, not her own cell phone she's not permitted to have, she and her father, Sergei, have been held incommunicado, currently at an unknown location, denied phone and computer contact with their relatives in Russia. That comes from the article, Yulia Skripal's Scripted Public Remarks. The Skripals are UK hostages at an unidentified location, by Stephen Lendman, posted May 24th. If it now a matter of public record that running a torture prison is a good career move, supported by both parties in Congress. And it is also interesting to note how fiercely the CIA fought to keep from having to reveal details of Haspel's career or even the records of the torture prison. It is unlikely that reports relating to events that took place 16 years ago could continue to be classified because they would reveal intelligence sources and methods. Rather, they remain top secret because they are potentially embarrassing to the participants, to those who directed and approved the activity, and to the organizations involved. In that light, the Haspel confirmation's acceptance of zero accountability is a perfect example of precisely what is wrong with the United States government. That comes from the article, For U.S. Congress, Running a Torture Prison is a Good Career Move, by Philip Giraldi, posted May 24th, originally appearing at Strategic Culture Foundation. Israel needs conflict and the destabilization of Syria and Iran, Hezbollah's suppliers, so that Israel can seize southern Lebanon. The American neoconservatives who are firmly entrenched in the Trump regime are de facto Israeli agents. Moreover, they are committed to American hegemony, which requires the overthrow of independent governments. Putin is betting that Washington's pursuit of hegemony in the Middle East will cost Washington hegemony in Europe. If Putin does not win this bet, he had better be prepared for the war that Washington and Israel are aiming directly at Russia. That comes from the article, Washington's Sabotage of Russian Diplomacy. Putin's Peace Efforts Are Coming to Naught, by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, posted May 24th, originally appearing on Paul Craig Roberts Institute for Political Economy. These are just a few of the featured articles appearing last week on the Global Research website. Regular visitors to the site are encouraged to send monetary contributions by fax, mail, or online. Just go to globalresearch.ca and click Donate on the menu bar. After decades of propaganda, the general public is becoming more adept at discerning the pretexts for war that are principally evoked by political leaders about the need to go to war with this or that country. There are, however, new ways of engaging regime changes that don't involve lies about weapons of mass destruction or self-defense against exaggerated threats from terrorists or communists. A relatively new instrument which involves new innovations of social media and psychological research is known alternatively as colored revolutions or fake democracy movements. The idea is that members of a society will be convinced to destabilize their own country in the name of democracy or freedom or human rights. A replacement for the governing authorities will be sought, which principally advances the aspirations of U.S. hegemonic rule, not the ideals animating popular struggles. A new book by author and Global Research NewsHour past guest F. William Engdahl explores this topic in depth. The book is called Manifest Destiny: Democracy as Cognitive Dissonance. It has recently been published by Mein Books in Germany. F. William Engdahl is an award-winning geopolitical analyst, strategic risk consultant, author, professor, and lecturer. He's been researching and writing about the world political scene for more than 30 years. His various books on geopolitics, the interaction between international power politics, economics, and geography have been translated into 14 foreign languages, from Chinese to French, from German to Japanese. He has lectured on contemporary geopolitics as visiting professor at Beijing University of Chemical Technology and delivers talks and private seminars around the world on different aspects of economics and politics with a focus on political risk. A regular contributor to a number of international publications on economics and political affairs, including Asia Times, FinancialSense.com, The Real News, and RT.com Op-Edge, William is a research associate of the Center for Research on Globalization and a member of the editorial board of Eurasia magazine. He currently lives in Germany and, in addition to writing and giving interviews on current events, consults as a political risk economist for various private organizations, major European banks, and private investor groups. In an interview conducted in early May, Mr. Engdahl explained the origin of a new mode of military intervention that had its origins in the Central Intelligence Agency.
It came out of a project proposed during the Reagan administration in 1983 by Reagan CIA Director Bill Casey. And at that time, the CIA was under the spotlight in Senate hearings and exposés around the world, the revelations by CIA whistleblowers for their involvement in the Pinochet coup in Chile, for the Iranian toppling of Mossadegh in the 50s and so forth. All that was beginning to come out, and it was having a huge negative effect. So Casey proposed doing what the CIA does, but doing it privately, and that resulted in creation of something by the U.S. Congress called the National Endowment for Democracy, using non-governmental organizations in a coherent way. I call them fake democracy NGOs, and you can get a better description in the actual book itself as I detail which NGOs are used in that. The monies come from the U.S. government or from certain private foundations, and they have systematically targeted nation after nation to topple regimes that are not friendly to the Washington agenda.
Bill Casey's first target for NED advanced regime change was communist Poland. As described in Engdahl's book, Poland was the weakest link in Moscow's chain of command. Starting in the mid-1980s, the NED funneled technology and equipment, including fax machines, copiers, computers, and phones, along with millions of dollars, into Lech Walensa's Solidarnosc, an independent, non-communist labor movement.
They funneled millions of dollars, U.S. taxpayer dollars, into Lech Walensa's Solidarnosc and created mass protests on the streets of Poland at a point where the communist government was simply powerless to intervene, among other reasons, because unbeknownst to most people, the Polish Pope, John Paul II, who had just been elected, and he met with Ronald Reagan and entered into a secret agreement, and this was later confirmed by Reagan's national security advisor, a secret agreement to bring down the communist regime in Poland, and they did that very successfully. Once they brought down the regime, they immediately privatized everything, but they freed up the zloty against the dollar, so the zloty fell like a lead stone. And then if you suddenly had dollar assets, like Western investors who were on the inside of this game did, you could buy up some of the crown jewels of the Polish economy for pennies on the dollar. And the losers in this were the Polish people.
William Engdahl mentions three more primary targets for NED-style interventions: the Soviet Union, Yugoslavia, and China.
In the case of the Soviet Union, they managed to bring in a CIA asset by the name of Boris Yeltsin and use Yeltsin to simply what I call in the book the rape of Russia, to literally steal and rob from the Russian state and the Russian people almost anything of value they could get their kleptocratic hands on. And in the case of Yugoslavia, it was the ignition that led to the explosion of a civil war and completely destroyed that country. In the case of China, the Chinese intelligence somehow managed to get wind of what was going on and kicked out certain NGO operatives that were connected with the U.S. State Department and the U.S. ambassador at that time to Beijing, James Milley, who was a former CIA crony of George Bush Sr.
Is it possible to detail some of the money flows? How does it translate on the ground, if I could put it that way?
How it translates on the ground is the money goes to all sorts of NGOs in target countries that pop up out of the thin air. In the period of the Ukraine color revolution, the so-called Orange Revolution in 2003, 2004, and also in Georgia, next door, they began focusing on election processes and having poll watchers, fake poll watchers, and then coordinating with embedded media like CNN or BBC to put out a certain message.
William Engdahl mentioned a Serbian organization called OTPAR, which he claims was trained by U.S. intelligence and it was instrumental in the overthrow of Slobodan Milosevic. This organization would evolve and become a template for further military operations in areas where the U.S. had strategic interests at stake. Engdahl explained the mechanics of this OTPAR model of regime overthrow.
That later transformed itself into a professional organization, keeping the cover of this successful Serbian regime change organization that they call Canvas, CANVAS, but the same people are involved. They're very secretive about where they get their funding from, but it's clear that it's coordinated with the U.S. State Department intelligence. And what they do, they serve as the logistics training center. The people on the ground from the U.S. government, and usually through the embassy, begin recruiting student activists. Usually, they're the most effective. They're trained in techniques very much similar to what we see going on today in Armenia. But they're trained in techniques to discredit the power and the authority of authoritarian governments or governments who try to resist mass protest. The techniques have been refined with Facebook and Twitter. Techniques are constantly being refined. The RAND Corporation, Research and Development Corporation, as detailed in the book Manifest Destiny, is developing techniques they call swarming. And they did a study of all or most of the major world brilliant military commanders, from Alexander the Great to Genghis Khan, Napoleon, and others, and their military tactics. And then they applied this to these mass protests. They used Twitter and Facebook to communicate with groups of protesters. And then their tactics will be protest and run, regroup in different parts of the city, and then keep the government completely off guard, keep the military or the security police off guard, so that the power of the state looks like it's impotent, and that begins to undermine authority.
The Arab Spring protests inspired popular struggles around the world. Taking a close look at one of the most dynamic of these revolutions, the overthrow of Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, William Engdahl explains that the Arab Spring protests were clearly influenced and orchestrated by hegemonic U.S. imperial interests.
I've spoken with some of the students who were in those protests, and they deeply believed that they were fighting for democracy and human rights. And that, without that, it doesn't work. It's not convincing. So that's an essential element of it. But what most of the students didn't realize is that behind the scenes were front organizations of a political terrorist cult called the Muslim Brotherhood, which was created in Egypt by British intelligence in the 1920s. And in the time of the Arab Spring, was backed by Hillary Clinton's State Department as the alternative to governments like Mubarak or Libya's Gaddafi or Ben Ali in Tunisia. And so the demonstrations spread, were successful. Once Mubarak stepped down, the Muslim Brotherhood and the U.S. government moved to have early elections, and the only organized force that was prepared to win early elections was the Muslim Brotherhood, and that's where you got Mohammed Morsi and a government controlled by the Muslim Brotherhood and supported by U.S. State Department and the CIA, which had been working, collaborating in cahoots with the Muslim Brotherhood since the early 1950s. In any event, the students were suddenly completely left in the lurch by Washington and the U.S. government because their agenda was to bring in this political terrorist organization.
In terms of financing these revolutions, how much of that funding is coming from, authorized by Congress versus off-the-book financing? And where is the off-the-book financing coming from?
There are private foundations that work in connection with the U.S. government finance, the National Endowment for Democracy, NED. And the breakdown of that is very difficult simply because they don't disclose in an open and honest way fully what they're financing. It's very difficult to trace.
William Engdahl mentioned in his book one of the mechanisms financing the looting or raping, as he put it, of Soviet Russia. It involved the use of gold obtained by the Japanese during the Second World War from colonized China, Mongolia, and Indonesia, and hidden in caves in the Philippines. Philippine leader Ferdinand Marcos came across this gold and attempted to sell it on world markets with the help of CIA asset Adnan Khashoggi. Khashoggi was friendly with George Herbert Walker Bush, a former CIA director.
So they used that Philippine gold, the Marcos gold, as collateral to create derivatives that were used to nominally back up the buying up of the Russian state assets by certain so-called Russian oligarchs who laundered the money through Western banks in Switzerland and the Jersey Islands offshore, the UK and other places. And all of that was done under the supervision of the CIA. And Safra's bank was one of the banks involved in that as well.
When we look at different revolutions that might be happening on the world, can we safely conclude that they're all stage managed and fake, or is there a way that we can distinguish between a genuine and a fake democracy revolution?
Sometimes very difficult. For example, the ongoing protests in Yerevan and Armenia. Armenia is a former Soviet, part of the Soviet Union, as you know, and a very strategic country for the security of Russia.
In April, protests in Armenia resulted in the resignation of Prime Minister Serge Sargsyan. Engdahl discusses the similarities between the popular revolt against Sargsyan and similar revolutions in Ukraine and other Soviet satellites.
Yes, the same U.S. government NGOs and private foundations that work with those U.S. government NGOs, like the National Endowment for Democracy, are very active in Armenia and have been active in Armenia on all the kinds of financing operations that have been connected with color revolutions in the past. This time, the opposition leader, Pashinyan, goes out of his way to stress that he's not against Armenia's membership in the Eurasian Economic Union or against Russia, but he's against the corruption of the Sargsyan, the former government, and the fact that the Armenian economy is in such bad shape. So there are genuine grievances that the population has, but the point is the U.S. State Department is very much on the scene. They're in telephone contact with Pashinyan, and all the indications are it hasn't been at its initiation a color revolution. The U.S. State Department and the intelligence agencies are for sure trying to figure out the best way to take advantage of that. In Azerbaijan, parliamentarians from Azerbaijan are saying, let's take advantage of this chaos in Armenia and retake Nagorno-Karabakh, which is majority Armenian ethnic population that seceded in 1991 from Azerbaijan. So in some cases, it's a very difficult distinction. Like I say, in the case of Armenia, I would say the jury's still out. My own sense is that it is being manipulated in the direction of a color revolution by the U.S. government, State Department, intelligence agency, but it's not 100% clear yet.
What do you think? I mean, it seems to me that you've mentioned the. I mean, there was the revolution or U.S. interference in Russia and the looting of Russia throughout the 1990s. Yeltsin was eventually removed, and Vladimir Putin came in. And since Vladimir Putin has arrived, I think the future of any more of this kind of U.S. intervention within Russia seems to be very dim, as is the case, it seems to me, in China. Again, as you mentioned, the that revolution, that fake democratic revolution, as you put it, it does not seem to have prevailed. So what are your thoughts about the future of this mode of this weapon of this fake democratic mechanism of warfare? Are the other states catching on? Are they going to be able to defend themselves from this? Are they learning their lessons?
Yes and no, I would say. Russia has certainly learned its lesson, and the Russian security services figuring out the pattern in Ukraine, Georgia, and they passed a bill in the Duma called the Law Against Undesirable NGOs, which various NGOs screamed and hollered about. China has made a similar crackdown on the NGOs, and other countries like smaller countries, I would say Armenia is a good example, are less experienced in this kind of thing and therefore less prepared to deal with it in an effective way. So it's very uneven. It's very uneven. And these are highly insidious operations where you have suddenly NGOs popping up and calling for democracy and more freedom for whatever in some country, whether it be Egypt or whatever. And then it's picked up by select Western media like CNN or BBC as a genuine grassroots movement, and the focus on the dictatorial regime, so most regimes don't want to get a bad press.
F. William Engdahl's book is Manifest Destiny: Democracy as Cognitive Dissonance. It is available on Amazon. For more information about William Engdahl, check out his website, William Engdahl, that's ENGDAHL.com, or read his articles posted at globalresearch.ca. You're listening to the Global Research News Hour, broadcast out of Winnipeg on campus community radio station CKUW 95.9 FM and on partner radio stations across Canada and the United States. We are also podcast on the website globalresearch.ca. On April 18th, anti-government protests sprang up across Nicaragua, triggered by reforms by the Sandinista government of the country's social security system. The opposition protests, led by students and backed by Nicaragua's business lobby, are accusing the government and its leader, Daniel Ortega, of violent crackdowns and repression of dissent. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, an autonomous arm of the Organization of American States, conducted research in a preliminary report, principally held the government accountable for the violence, which they say included torture and murder. The IACHR documents 76 people killed and 868 injured since April 18th. Nicaraguan officials are currently in talks with students and business leaders to resolve weeks of tension with the increasingly unpopular Ortega. Are the events of the last month in Nicaragua representing a shift toward democracy that was left by the wayside under a once promising guerrilla leader, or is this an example of the latest colored revolution designed to advance U.S. imperial interests in the country and the region? To discuss this question, we turn to Stephen Sefton. He is a community worker and co-worker of the anti-imperialist Tortilla con Sal Media Collective based out of Managua. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you very much for inviting me to talk on your program, Michael.
Yes, so it sounds like you got a little bit of rain there in the background.
Yeah, everybody's very pleased because the rainy season started on time, and which is very important for local farmers and for the economy as a whole.
Now, the mainstream Western press is speaking of brutal crackdowns on peaceful protesters of the Ortega government. And, this description kind of resembles much of the reporting on the Euromaidan in late 2013, early 2014. I was wondering if you could just give us your group's interpretation of events, maybe starting with a breakdown of the circumstances that led up to the student protest of April 18th.
Yeah, and I think you have to look at the history of the last 5, 6, 7 years here in Nicaragua. From 2010 onwards, the Nicaraguan economy has been the most successful economy in Central America, apart from Panama, but Panama's such a special case. And in terms of its immediate neighbors, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Costa Rica, Nicaragua has been by far the most successful economy from 2010 to date. And that explains, in large part, the incredible popularity of President Ortega in electoral terms. He won the election in 2011 with over 60% of the vote, and he won the presidential election in 2016 with just over 70% of the vote. So, and both those elections were regarded as free and fair by international observers. However, begrudgingly, they may have acknowledged that the vote reflected the will of Nicaraguan people. The European Union, for example, had an observer mission. They acknowledged the legitimacy of the vote. And many other election observers did as well. So then the question is, what has happened between 2016 and 2018 to trigger this incredibly violent series of events that began on April the 18th? And our answer to that question is that it's very much, as you pointed out in your introduction there, one of these color revolutions, very similar to what happened in Ukraine, very similar to what happened in Libya and Syria back in 2011. And so then the question is, how seriously does one take the preliminary report of the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights, which is a body very much under the thumb of the United States. It has its secretaries in Washington, and many people here in Latin America regard the Organization of American States as little more than a ministry for the colonies. Borrowing that term from the Spanish Empire and translating it to the current attempts of the United States to reimpose its imperialist dominion over Latin America and the Caribbean.
The OAS did exclude Cuba from shortly after the revolution, right?
Yeah, and of course, when it was originally set up, it was set up just at the beginning of the Cold War. But let's not get distracted by the history of the OAS. But trying to realize what the OAS is, you just have to look at the way it's behaved towards Venezuela and its disgraceful interventionist behavior in Venezuela, completely in breach of its very own rules. So anything coming out of the Organization of American States is highly questionable because it's always biased against any progressive government. And the same is true of this preliminary report. Now, the figures may be right, but it's completely impractical on their part to say that they carried out a sufficient investigation to be able to know where responsibility lies for the violence. They arrived in the country on Friday, April 17th, and they've been in the country for precisely 4 days. And they're a very small delegation, and not more than a dozen people as far as I know. So how is it possible in just 4 days for these 12 people to adequately investigate the events that took place over the previous month? And it's just absurd. So then one has to say, well, why did the event start? Now, the supposed trigger, the alleged trigger for the protests was a social security form by the government. That was interpreted as being anti-worker and anti-pensioner. Well, in fact, the reverse is true. As so often in these cases, as so often we've seen in these colour revolutions, the immediate pretext for the violence that erupts turns out to be false on closer examination, and that's very much the case here, because what happened was that the business organization withdrew from the negotiations about the Social Security form because they were the ones that were going to pay more. And it's true that there were modest increases for workers and a slight cut in benefits for pensioners, but that cut in benefits for pensioners was more than compensated for because they were going to be, as a result of the reform, they were for the first time ever in the history of Nicaragua's social security system, all pensioners would be entitled to the same healthcare rights as active workers contributing to the system. So, and why did the business organization withdraw? Because they were the ones that were going to have to pay more. And this is very important to understand the contradictions in the subsequent protests. The fundamental contradiction is this. The students protested a social security reform that was actually more favorable to the workers than the business side's proposal. And their protests are being supported. Look at who's supporting their protests. People like Marco Rubio, Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, and Bob Menendez, and Donald Trump and Mike Pence, and they support the protests because they're saying that it's a legitimate call for democracy in Nicaragua, which is one of the most democratic countries in the region. The other thing to bear in mind is that it's big local corporate businesses that are also supporting the protests. Now, if you look at that, people need to ask, why is that? Do they really believe that big corporate capital and the United States authorities and right-wing US senators could care less about democracy in Nicaragua? It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I would think so. But I don't know. I guess that speaks to the grip of the propaganda systems.
Yeah, and I think the angle that you're taking is absolutely right. And this is very, very similar to the coup in the Ukraine in 2014 and the NATO-backed coups against Libya and Syria back in 2011. But let's leave it there for now and look at what actually happened. On the Wednesday, the 18th of April, there were protests by students and a few pensioners, but the main pensioners organisation, the one that has represented pensioners in Nicaragua in negotiations over the last 2 or 3 years, accepted the reform because they recognised that overall it was beneficial to pensioners in Nicaragua. So then, mainly it was the students that were protesting on Wednesday the 18th. And what happened was that rival groups of students and rival groups of young government supporters clashed with the protesting students, and the police then had to intervene to maintain order. And that is where the violence began. And on Thursday the 19th, the situation dramatically changed, because what you then had were very determined groups of armed extremists who were deliberately attacking the police. Now, the image projected in the international corporate media, of course, is of peaceful protests. But the protests from Thursday the 19th on and from late on Wednesday night, Wednesday the 18th on, were far from peaceful. And they involved violent groups actually attacking police stations, they burnt down a building in the University of Leon, the National Autonomous University in Leon. There's some damage to other university precincts in Managua. But the fundamental thing that gives the lie to the suggestion that the protests were peaceful is that they attacked the municipal offices in Grenada, they attacked municipal offices in Chinandega, in Masaya, they attacked municipal offices in Esteli, and on Friday the 20th of April, on that night, when 2 students died, nobody knows how they died. They were shot, but nobody knows by whom, because the police were not firing live rounds. The authorities here insist that the police were not firing live rounds. And what happened that night here in Esteli, where I live, is that a group of between 500 and 600 attackers attacked the alcaldía. They attacked an adjacent building that was used as a store for food for Nicaragua's extensive social programs, and they also tried to ransack a local supermarket. Now, in that battle, it was a 5-hour pitched battle. In that battle, around 1,000 of these homemade mortar rounds were fired, and those arms are they're lethal. And also around 16 or 17 Molotov cocktails were thrown at the alcaldía, just at the alcaldía, that's the municipal authority office.
Are you talking about the larger group, or is it maybe just a minority faction that are doing these things?
No, it's the extremist groups are very clever and have worked to a very carefully planned operational scheme. They intermingle with protesting students, then provoke the violence, then the students get caught up in the violence, and that is what has led to deaths among the students. But if you analyse, as you said in the report, the Inter-American Commission report, they talk about over 860 wounded, and now that may well be true. But of those wounded, around 200 are police. And of the dead, at least 3 or 4 are police. And so, among those 76 dead, and let's assume just for argument's sake, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. I don't think the number of dead associated with the protest is that large, but let's say it is. Of those, at least half are police, bystanders, or government supporters. At least half. And the rest may be students or protesters, or because what we can know for sure, and this is very well substantiated by testimony, is that a substantial number of the people involved in the violent attacks are paid young delinquents that have been recruited from barrios, and they're paid local districts in different cities of Nicaragua, Leon, Escalí, Masaya, and other parts of the country, and they're bussed in to different parts of the country to carry out the attacks. And they're paid between $10 and $15 a day. That's very well substantiated. So then, and if you look at the events of the previous week, of last week, there were repeated attacks on police stations, even though the police had been withdrawn from the streets. This is what's so extraordinary here in Nicaragua. Can you imagine any other country in the world where, faced with these kinds of protests, the government that's accused of being a dictatorship would withdraw the police from the streets? And so what happened at that point? At that point, you'd have expected the protesters to say, oh, well, we can protest peacefully now because the police aren't on the streets to repress us. But instead of that, what did they do? They attacked police stations. They attacked police stations in Masaya, in Matagalpa, and in Jinotega. And in those attacks, they injured police officers and wounded at least 3 government supporters.
You're saying that very early on the government started to back away from any repressive violence, but the opposition, forces, including these individuals. I mean, are we talking gangs here? They were increasing their violence.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they increased their violence. And on April the 21st, President Daniel Ortega announced that he was proposing a national dialogue, and the business organization here accepted that. Then on Sunday the 22nd, he said that he was instructing the Social Security Institute to withdraw the proposed Social Security reform, which in any case wasn't going to be implemented until July. And may well have required debate in the National Assembly before it could be implemented in any case. So, and when he announced that, at the same time that he announced the withdrawal of the reform measure, he announced that he was requesting the Episcopal Conference here, which is an organization of the Catholic bishops, the bishops of the Catholic Church here in Nicaragua, to mediate the national dialogue. And at that point, the police operations began to be take a much lower profile, and in order to give the national dialogue a chance. Now, you tell me, Michael, in what other country in the world would the government make such a big concession to extremely violent protests? There was nothing peaceful about the protests that attacked municipal offices and police stations. And then on top of that, following that weekend of the 21st and the 22nd, the relatively small opposition groups, just to give you an idea, and there are something like 15,000 members of transport organizations in Managua. Of those, around 200 were trying to impose a strike on their fellow transport workers, taxi drivers, bus drivers, and so forth. And what they did was they kind of set up roadblocks around the city, and they were actually attacking taxis with passengers in them and attacking buses with passengers in them. They even attacked a bus that was carrying children with disability from a special school, taking them back home. And there's been nothing peaceful about those protests, but at the same time, amid all that chaos, the opposition did hold peaceful protest marches, but those were very much the exception rather than the rule, because over the last month, the whole population here in Nicaragua has been subject to really serious intimidation. And there are roadblocks set up across the country that are refusing to let trucks with supplies of all kinds circulate freely. And there have been various incidents in which patients in ambulances have suffered as a result of the roadblocks. Last week, a pregnant woman that was on her way to hospital over in the east of the country on the Atlantic coast, went into convulsions in the ambulance because it had been held for 3 hours at one of the roadblocks. The team in the ambulance were unable to stabilize her, and she died. And so, if people want to talk about human rights, that's one of the things that's being debated as we speak in the national dialogue process, because what the overwhelming majority of people in Nicaragua are indignant about is that their rights are being denied, their rights to freedom of movement, their rights to be able to go get to hospitals, get to school, just carry on their normal life. That all those basic rights are being denied them by a minority of people who are calling for the overthrow of the government. Now, on that score, it's worth bearing in mind that even Luis Almagro, who's about as under the thumb of the United States imperialists as you can get, the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, even he has rejected those demands by the right-wing extremists because he says it's undemocratic.
How do you think things are going to turn out? Is it going to be like Ukraine, or is the country going to recover, and like is it?
Well, you can ask me, and if you ask me in 10 hours' time, I'll have a different answer, because it's a real roller coaster.
Yeah.
And sometimes you think everything's going to work out all right, and other times it just looks as though civil war's just around the corner. You know, and it's impossible to it's impossible to say what's going to happen. But the only thing in that respect, the main question is, the government's bent over backwards to promote dialogue and make the dialogue possible. The opposition, on the other hand, have set preconditions. They're very aggressive. In the installation of the dialogue, they were very aggressive. They clearly don't want the dialogue because talks won't get them what they want, which is Ortega out.
Yeah.
That's what they want. But the difficulty that they have is that the vast majority of people in Nicaragua sympathize with the government, because the government has given them the best economic conditions anybody in Nicaragua has ever experienced in their lifetime. Okay, and that's no exaggeration. I mean, if you look at Nicaragua's history, I was born in, I'm 66, I'm 65, I'll be 66 this year. I've lived in Nicaragua for almost, almost 30 years, no, over 30 years now.
Wow.
1986.
Do you remember
32 years,
yeah.
Right? And Nicaragua has never been as prosperous as it was over the last 5 years. Never.
Oh, yeah. And I imagine that the Contra insurgency is still in the living memory. So, you know.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. If you talk to former Contra leaders, they'll say that they are against what's going on at the moment, because they recognise that this government has radically transformed Nicaragua's economy for the better, especially in terms of democratization. Just a simple figure. 70% of the population work in small businesses, family businesses, cooperatives, that kind of area. And they generate around 54% of GDP. So it's the popular economy here after 10 years of government under the Sandinista President Daniel Ortega that is the motor of Nicaragua's economy. It's not the private business sector. You know, and that is something fundamental to understand about Nicaragua's economy. And the business sector are actually a minority contributor to the country's GDP. The main contributors are the popular economy, the associative cooperative economy, small businesses, and the government investment. Those are the main components of GDP.
It's a kind of economy that's not convenient to hegemonic world powers.
Oh, yeah, correct. And but there's so many aspects of this that we need to, you know, to understand what's going on here.
Yeah.
You need to look at so many different aspects, and we can just touch on them in the briefest possible way in these conversations.
Yeah, that's true. I did want to get one quick question from about the local media and how that's influencing the situation.
Well, the local media here are mostly controlled by the opposition. The two main newspapers are controlled by the opposition, and half the television channels are controlled by the opposition, including a virulently anti-government news channel called 100% Noticias. And so one of the good things that has happened is that the national dialogue is being televised. So ordinary people can see for themselves what the positions of the government are, the various interest groups in Nicaraguan society and economy aligned with the government and the opposition. Now, the key thing that the opposition are refusing to do is that they're refusing to dismantle the roadblocks. Now, and the roadblocks are operated by masked thugs who are armed, and it's like, if you could, do you live in? Is it Toronto that you live in?
I'm based in Winnipeg.
Okay, well, imagine any big city in Canada, and imagine that all the main roads out are blocked by masked people carrying weapons, and that the police are off the streets. And imagine that. Well, that's the situation here in Nicaragua.
Well, you know, I really appreciate you because everything that you're saying here has been completely off the mainstream media radar, and I think our listeners are very grateful for your helping shed light on this situation. So I want to thank you very much, Stephen Sefton. And also, if our listeners want to know more, they can check out the website tortillaconsol.com. So thanks, Stephen, for sharing your thoughts with us.
Okay, you're very welcome, Michael. I'm glad you think it was useful.
That was our show for this week. If you like what you heard and value the independent perspectives this radio program brings every week, please consider a generous contribution to stations like CKUW, which air the program, as well as to the Global Research website by visiting globalresearch.ca and clicking Donate on the menu bar. You've been listening to the Global Research News Hour. You can listen to our programs every week on CKUW 95.9 FM in Winnipeg and on partnering radio stations across Canada and the United States. You can also download each episode from the website globalresearch.ca. To leave feedback on this program, email globalresearchnewshour@gmail.com. I'm series host, creator, and producer Michael Welch. Join us again next week.